The Friday evening shift at Rosewood Restaurant always brought chaos. Tables packed with couples celebrating anniversaries, business dinners running late, and families squeezing in before theater shows. Lisa had worked there for 3 years now, and she knew the rhythm by heart. Smile at table 6, refill water at table 12, dodge the hurried servers rushing past with steaming plates of pasta. At 28 years old, this wasn't exactly where she had imagined herself. But life had a funny way of changing plans. The tips were decent enough to cover rent on her small studio apartment, and the manager didn't mind if she occasionally hummed while clearing tables. Most importantly, the restaurant closed early enough on weekdays that she could make it to the music store downtown before they locked up. That's where her real life happened. In the back storage room of Miller's music shop, surrounded by dusty instrument cases and boxes of sheet music, there sat an old upright piano. The owner, an elderly man who had given up on selling it years ago, let her practice there after hours. She would sit on that worn bench for 2 hours every night, her fingers dancing across keys that desperately needed tuning, playing pieces that most people only heard in concert halls. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air that Lisa couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the full moon, or maybe it was just another busy Friday. She tied her black apron around her waist and picked up her order pad, ready to dive into the dinner rush. The restaurant had a beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner near the window. It was one of those fancy Steinway models that probably cost more than Lisa made in 5 years. Every Friday and Saturday night, an older gentleman named Robert would come in and play soft jazz standards. Nothing too loud, nothing too flashy. Just gentle background music that made the wealthy diners feel sophisticated while they ate their expensive meals. Robert had been playing at Rosewood for over a decade. He was as much a part of the place as the crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths. Lisa had never spoken to him much, just the occasional polite hello when she passed by with a tray of dishes. But she had listened to him play hundreds of times, and she could tell he was good. Not extraordinary, but reliably good. The kind of good that made people comfortable. At exactly 5:45, the phone in the kitchen rang. Lisa was busy taking an order from a couple at table 9 when she heard the manager, Tom, let out a frustrated groan that echoed through the restaurant. She finished writing down the order for 2 seafood pastas and made her way toward the kitchen to see what was wrong. Tom was standing by the phone, his hand pressed against his forehead in that way people do when they're trying to prevent a headache from forming. He looked up at Lisa with tired eyes. Robert wasn't coming. His wife had called to say he'd caught some kind of flu and could barely get out of bed. Tom glanced at his watch. The dinner rush was about to explode, and he had a piano sitting silent in the corner like a broken promise. For a restaurant like Rosewood, this was a genuine crisis. Their whole brand was built on atmosphere. People didn't just come here for the food. They came for the experience, the ambiance, the feeling of being somewhere special. That piano needed to have someone playing it. The silence would be too noticeable, too awkward. Tom started making frantic calls to other piano players in the area, but it was Friday evening. Everyone who was any good was already booked. Some didn't answer. Others laughed at the last-minute request. One guy said he could make it by 9, which was far too late. Lisa continued her work, carrying plates, pouring wine, making small talk with customers who barely looked at her face. She was good at being invisible, at blending into the background. That's what made her a good server. But inside, her heart was beating a little faster every time she glanced at that empty piano bench. She had a secret that nobody at Rosewood knew about. Before the student loans became too crushing, before her mother got sick and needed help with medical bills, before life got complicated, Lisa had been a music student at the conservatory across town. She had studied classical piano for 4 years under some of the best teachers in the city. She had performed in recitals, won small competitions, dreamed of someday playing in concert halls. But dreams didn't pay bills. When her mother's cancer treatment started draining every penny, Lisa had to make a choice. She dropped out in her final year, just months before graduation, and found work wherever she could. The conservatory felt like a lifetime ago now, like something that had happened to a different person. By 6:30, Tom had given up on finding a replacement. He stood near the host stand, watching the dining room fill up with guests, and Lisa could see the defeat in his shoulders. She walked past him carrying a basket of bread to table 15. and without thinking too much about it, she paused. "I can play," she said quietly. Tom looked at her like she had just spoken a foreign language. "What? The piano? I can play it. If you need someone." He studied her face for a moment, clearly skeptical. Lisa was just a waitress to him. A reliable one, sure, but still just someone who brought food to tables and occasionally mixed up orders when things got too busy. The idea that she could sit down at a $15,000 piano and produce music seemed unlikely. "You're serious?" he asked. "I studied at the conservatory for 4 years. I can play background music. Jazz standards, classical pieces, whatever you need." Tom glanced at the piano, then back at Lisa, then at his watch. He was doing the math in his head. Even if she was terrible, it might be better than nothing. At least there would be sound coming from that corner of the room. "Okay," he said finally. "Give it a try. If it doesn't work out, we'll just tell people the pianist is sick. No big deal." Lisa untied her apron and handed it to another server who looked confused about the sudden change in plans. Her hands were already trembling as she walked across the dining room toward the piano. A few customers glanced up at her, probably wondering why their waitress was abandoning her section. She sat down on the leather bench and adjusted her position, her fingers hovering over the keys. The piano was perfectly maintained, nothing like the beaten-up instrument she practiced on every night. This was a real professional instrument, the kind that responded to the slightest touch. For a moment, panic set in. What was she doing? She hadn't played for an audience in 3 years. She hadn't played on a piano this nice in even longer. Her daily practice sessions in that dusty storage room suddenly felt inadequate, like showing up to a marathon after only jogging around the block a few times. But the restaurant was filling up with people. The silence was becoming noticeable. She could feel Tom watching her from across the room, probably already regretting his decision. Lisa took a deep breath and let her fingers find the opening notes of Moon River. It was safe, recognizable, easy enough that her nervous hands could manage it. The first few notes came out shaky, but then something shifted. The muscle memory kicked in. Her fingers remembered what to do even when her mind was flooded with doubt. The melody floated through the restaurant, soft and gentle, exactly what Tom had hoped for. A few diners smiled. Conversations continued. Everything seemed normal, but Lisa's heart was pounding in her chest because she knew this was just the beginning. The notes of Moon River drifted through the restaurant like a gentle stream. Lisa kept her eyes focused on the keys, not daring to look up at the diners. Her fingers moved through the familiar melody with careful precision. Not too loud, not too soft. Just background music, exactly what Tom wanted. She could hear the restaurant coming alive around her. The clinking of wine glasses, the low murmur of conversations, the occasional laugh from a nearby table. Nobody was really listening to her. They were here for the food, for each other, for the Friday night feeling of escape from their busy lives. The piano was just decoration that happened to make sound, and that was fine. That was safe. Lisa moved from Moon River into Autumn Leaves, another classic that Robert played most Friday nights. Her shoulders began to relax slightly. She could do this. It wasn't so different from practicing alone in that storage room, except here she had an audience that wasn't paying attention. In some ways, that made it easier. Across the room, Tom gave her a small nod of approval before turning back to greet a party of 6 at the entrance. The other servers had picked up her tables without complaint. Everything was running smoothly, crisis averted. But something was stirring inside Lisa that she hadn't expected. Being at this piano, this beautiful instrument that responded to her every touch, was awakening something that had been sleeping for 3 years. Her fingers wanted to do more than just trace the outline of simple jazz standards. They wanted to run, to fly, to remember what they had been trained to do. She pushed the feeling down and started playing The Way You Look Tonight. Keep it simple, she told herself. This isn't a concert hall. These people don't want to hear anything complicated. They want background noise. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Lisa settled into a comfortable rhythm, moving between songs that most people recognized but couldn't quite name. Her hands knew these pieces so well that her mind began to wander. She thought about her mother, who was doing better now, finally in remission after 2 brutal years of treatment. She thought about her tiny apartment with its leaking faucet that the landlord kept promising to fix. She thought about that dusty storage room and the old piano that had become her only connection to the life she used to dream about. A couple at table 8 requested their check. A businessman at the bar ordered another scotch. Life in the restaurant continued, indifferent to the woman at the piano. But then something happened that Lisa didn't plan for. Between songs, in that brief moment of silence when her hands hovered over the keys deciding what to play next, a memory hit her with unexpected force. She remembered sitting in Professor Williams' studio at the conservatory, struggling through Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 for the first time. She remembered him saying, "This piece will break your heart and rebuild it in the same breath, but you have to be brave enough to let it." She had practiced that concerto for 8 months. It had consumed her entire final year at the conservatory, every spare moment spent wrestling with its technical demands and emotional depth. She had been preparing to perform it for her senior recital, the performance that would have been her graduation moment, her transition from student to professional musician. That recital never happened. She had withdrawn from school 2 weeks before the scheduled date, her mother's medical bills piling up faster than she could count them. Lisa's hands were still hovering over the keys. The silence had stretched just a bit too long. A few diners glanced in her direction, wondering if something was wrong. This was the moment when everything could have stayed the same. She could have started another safe jazz standard. She could have kept herself invisible, kept playing the role of background decoration. That would have been the smart choice, the professional choice. But sitting at this magnificent piano, after 3 years of stuffing down every dream she had ever carried, something inside Lisa cracked open. She let her hands fall to the keys and began to play Rachmaninoff. The opening notes were soft, almost questioning, like someone whispering a secret. But there was something different in the air now, something that made the businessman at the bar pause mid-sip. The melody was achingly beautiful, more complex than anything that had been played in this restaurant in years. Lisa's eyes closed. She wasn't in Rosewood Restaurant anymore. She was back in the conservatory's practice rooms, back in that space where music was the only thing that mattered. Her fingers moved across the keys with a speed and precision that shocked even her. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not forgotten. The piece began to build. What started as a whisper was growing into something powerful, something that demanded attention. The technical passages that had once taken her hours to master came flowing back like a language she thought she had forgotten, but had only been sleeping in her mind. At table 12, a woman stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with her husband. She turned her head toward the piano, confusion crossing her face. This wasn't background music anymore. The melody climbed higher, more urgent now. Lisa's whole body swayed with the music. Tears were forming at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. 3 years of held-back emotion, 3 years of pretending that she didn't miss this with every fiber of her being, came pouring out through her fingers. A couple at table 5 set down their forks. The man who had been scrolling through his phone at table 9 looked up, his screen going dark and forgotten. One by one, conversations began to fade. Tom stood frozen near the host stand, his mouth slightly open. This wasn't what he had expected when he let his waitress sit down at the piano. This was something else entirely. The music filled every corner of the restaurant now, impossible to ignore. It swept through the room like a wave, catching everyone in its current. The piece moved through its dramatic middle section, Lisa's fingers flying across the keys in passages that most professional pianists spent years perfecting. In the kitchen, the head chef, a stern man who rarely left his station, pushed through the swinging doors to see what was happening. 2 line cooks followed behind him, still holding their spatulas. They stood in the doorway, transfixed. The elderly couple at table 3, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, reached for each other's hands across the table. The woman's eyes were glistening with tears. "I haven't heard anyone play like this since the concert halls in Vienna," she whispered to her husband. At table 7, a woman in an expensive business suit had completely forgotten about the contract she had been reviewing over dinner. She sat perfectly still, her pen hovering over the unsigned document, her full attention on the music filling the air. Lisa was fully lost in the piece now, her body moving with the rise and fall of the melody. The technical difficulty of the concerto didn't matter anymore. She wasn't thinking about finger positions or tempo markings. She was simply feeling. remembering what it was like to let music move through her without fear or holding back. The piece built toward its famous crescendo, the part that always gave audiences chills in concert halls. Lisa's hands moved with absolute certainty, striking the keys with a power that surprised even her. The sound was enormous, filling the space like an orchestra compressed into 88 keys. And then, as the final crushing chords approached, something extraordinary happened. Every single conversation in the restaurant had stopped. The silence was complete except for the piano. 60 people sat frozen in their seats, some with forks still raised halfway to their mouths. The servers stood motionless against the walls, their trays forgotten. Even the sounds from the kitchen had ceased as everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. Lisa's fingers hit the final powerful chord. The note rang out through the restaurant, echoing off the high ceilings, sustaining in the air for what felt like an eternity, then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Lisa's hands remained on the keys, trembling now. She was breathing hard, as if she had just run a marathon. Slowly, almost afraid of what she would find, she opened her eyes and looked up at the dining room for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the restaurant was staring at her. Lisa's heart hammered in her chest as she took in the scene before her. The elderly couple at table 3 had tears streaming down their faces. The businessman at the bar had turned his entire body around on his stool, his drink completely forgotten. The woman in the expensive suit sat with her hand pressed against her chest as if trying to calm her own heartbeat. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was so thick that Lisa could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Then it started. One person began to clap. Then another. Then suddenly the entire restaurant erupted into applause. But this wasn't polite dinner applause, the kind you give out of obligation. This was something else. People were standing up from their tables, their chairs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound of clapping filled the room like thunder. Lisa sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still trembling on the keys. She had no idea what to do. In all her years of studying music, performing in recitals and competitions, she had never experienced a reaction like this. This was raw and real in a way that felt almost overwhelming. The elderly man from table 3 was walking toward her, his wife following close behind. He had tears in his eyes and his hands were still clapping. When he reached the piano, he stopped and just looked at Lisa for a moment, shaking his head in disbelief. "Young lady," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I haven't heard anyone play like that in 40 years. Not since I heard Horowitz perform in Carnegie Hall in 1983. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, removing several crisp bills. "Please take this. You deserve so much more than what you probably make here." Lisa stared at the money in his outstretched hand. It was $200. She opened her mouth to protest, to say that she couldn't possibly accept it, but the words wouldn't come out. "Take it," the elderly woman insisted, her own eyes wet with tears. "My husband played piano professionally for 30 years before arthritis took it from him. He knows talent when he hears it. And what you just did, what we all just witnessed, that was a gift." More people were approaching now. A younger couple pressed a $50 bill into her hands before she could refuse. The businessman from the bar pulled out his phone. "I recorded the last 2 minutes," he said. "I hope that's okay. My daughter is studying music at the university and she needs to hear this. She needs to know that this kind of playing still exists in the world." Lisa felt like she was in a dream. Around her, the restaurant was buzzing with energy. People were talking excitedly, some still wiping tears from their eyes, others trying to explain to their dinner companions what they had just experienced. It was as if something magical had happened, and everyone in the room had been part of it. Tom appeared beside the piano, and Lisa expected him to be angry. She had completely abandoned her role as a server. She had played something far beyond what he had asked for, but when she looked at his face, she didn't see anger. She saw shock and something that looked almost like pride. "Lisa," he said quietly, leaning close so only she could hear, "why didn't you ever tell me you could play like that?" "You never asked," she replied simply. He shook his head, a small laugh escaping his lips despite his obvious amazement. "I've been running this restaurant for 12 years. Robert is good, don't get me wrong, but what you just did..." He paused, searching for words. That was extraordinary. More diners were coming up to speak with her now. An older woman told her about seeing a performance at the Kennedy Center that hadn't moved her half as much as what she had just heard. A father told her that his teenage son, who usually spent every dinner glued to his phone, had actually looked up and listened. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, approached with shy admiration in her eyes. "I take piano lessons," the young woman said softly, "but I've been thinking about quitting because I didn't think I was good enough. But watching you just now, seeing how much feeling you put into it, that changed something for me. Thank you." Lisa felt a lump forming in her throat. She had spent 3 years believing that her music didn't matter to anyone, that it was just a selfish dream that had gotten in the way of practical survival. But here were all these people, strangers, telling her that what she had just shared had touched something deep inside them. At table 14 near the window sat a man who hadn't approached like the others. He was probably in his mid-50s, dressed in an elegant suit that suggested either wealth or a career that demanded formality. He had been dining alone, and throughout Lisa's performance, he had sat completely still, his meal untouched on the plate before him. Now he was watching her with an intensity that made Lisa feel slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't a creepy stare, but rather the look of someone who was trying to solve a puzzle. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking quietly into it while keeping his eyes on Lisa. Tom eventually had to gently guide people back to their tables. Dinner service still needed to continue after all, but the energy in the restaurant had completely transformed. People were no longer just eating and talking. They were present, alive, connected to something bigger than their individual conversations. Lisa stood up from the piano bench, her legs slightly unsteady. She collected the bills that people had pressed into her hands, money that added up to more than she typically made in tips during an entire weekend shift. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life for those few minutes. As she made her way back toward the server station, she was stopped every few steps by diners who wanted to shake her hand or say thank you. One woman grabbed her arm gently. "Are you performing anywhere else? I would pay serious money to hear you play a full concert." Lisa didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't performing anywhere. She was a waitress who practiced on a broken piano in a storage room after her shifts ended. The gap between what she had just done and what her actual life looked like felt impossibly wide. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lisa tried to return to her serving duties, but Tom insisted that she stay at the piano. "Play whatever you want," he said. "I don't care if it's jazz standards or more classical pieces. Just play." So she did. She played Debussy and Chopin. She played some modern pieces by Ludovico Einaudi that she had taught herself from YouTube videos. She played music that came from somewhere deep inside, pieces that she had composed in her head during long shifts but had never written down. The restaurant stayed packed far later than usual. People who had finished their meals ordered more coffee, more wine, anything to have an excuse to stay and keep listening. Some new customers even arrived, having heard from friends who had texted them about what was happening at Rosewood that night. Through it all, the man in the elegant suit at table 14 remained. He had eventually eaten his dinner, but he stayed long after his plate was cleared, watching and listening. At one point, Lisa saw him pull out a small notebook and write something down. Then he made another phone call, this one lasting several minutes. As the night wound down and the last customers began to leave, many stopped by the piano one more time. They thanked Lisa again, some pressing additional tips into her hands despite her protests. A few asked for her phone number, saying they wanted to invite her to play at private events. But the man from table 14 waited until everyone else had gone. He approached the piano just as Lisa was gathering her things, preparing to finally head home after the strangest, most overwhelming night of her life. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I hope I'm not bothering you. I know you must be exhausted." Lisa turned to face him, curious about this man who had watched her so intently all evening. Up close, she could see kindness in his eyes, along with something that looked like excitement barely contained beneath a professional exterior. "I'm fine," she said, though in truth she felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The man smiled and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a business card. "My name is David Chen. I work with the City Symphony Orchestra, and I also sit on the board of the Keller Foundation. We provide grants and support for emerging musical talent. He held out the card and Lisa took it with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the text, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What you did tonight," David continued, "that wasn't just good playing. That was the kind of artistry we spend years searching for. And I have to ask, why are you working as a waitress when you could be performing on stages across the country?" Lisa stared at the business card in her hand, the embossed letters blurring slightly as exhaustion and emotion caught up with her. David Chen stood patiently, waiting for her response to his question. Why was she working as a waitress instead of performing on stages? The answer was simple and complicated all at once. "Because stages don't pay my rent," Lisa said quietly, "and dreams don't cover medical bills." David nodded slowly, and something in his expression told Lisa that he had heard stories like hers before. "May I sit down for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the piano bench. Lisa moved over, making room for him. The restaurant was nearly empty now. Tom was in the back office counting receipts, and the last few servers were wiping down tables and preparing to close for the night. The kitchen had gone quiet. "I'm going to tell you something," David said, settling onto the bench beside her. "And I need you to really hear me, not just listen. But hear what I'm saying." Lisa turned to face him, curious despite her tiredness. "I've been working in classical music for 27 years, he continued. "I've heard thousands of musicians. Students, professionals, world-renowned performers. I've sat through countless auditions and concerts. And what you did tonight, that performance, ranks among the most moving things I've ever witnessed. Not because it was technically perfect, though your technique is exceptional, but because you played with your whole heart. That's rare. That's the thing we can't teach." Lisa felt tears threatening again. She had cried enough for one night, but his words were breaking through walls she had carefully built over 3 years. "Here's what I don't understand," David said gently. "You clearly have conservatory training. That level of skill doesn't come from casual lessons. So what happened? Why did you stop?" And so Lisa told him. She told him about her mother's cancer diagnosis in her final year at the conservatory. She told him about watching the medical bills pile up, about the impossible choice between finishing her degree and making sure her mother got the treatment she needed. She told him about dropping out just weeks before her senior recital, about finding work at Rosewood because they were hiring immediately and she needed money fast. "My mom is okay now," Lisa said, wiping at her eyes. "She's been in remission for 8 months. But by the time she got better, I was already so far behind. The conservatory wouldn't take me back without full tuition for the remaining semester, which I definitely don't have. And even if I could go back, I'm 3 years out of practice. Well, real practice. I play in a storage room after work, but that's not the same as proper training." David listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Lisa," he said finally, "what you just played tonight proves that you haven't lost anything. If anything, those 3 years of struggle have given your playing a depth that most young musicians don't have. You're not playing notes on a page anymore. You're playing life experience." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. "I made 3 phone calls during your performance tonight. One to my colleague at the symphony, one to the director of the Keller Foundation, and one to someone I think you should meet." Lisa's heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "The symphony needs a new pianist for our chamber ensemble. The woman who held the position just moved to Boston. We've been auditioning people for 2 months and haven't found the right fit. I want you to audition." "But I haven't auditioned for anything in 3 years, Lisa protested. "And symphony positions are incredibly competitive. People with degrees from top conservatories audition for those spots." "Let me worry about that," David said with a small smile. "The audition is just a formality at this point. After what I heard tonight, I'm confident you'll get the position if you want it." Lisa's mind was racing. A symphony position meant a steady salary, health insurance, and the chance to play music professionally. It was everything she had dreamed about when she first started at the conservatory. "There's more," David continued. "The Keller Foundation provides grants to musicians who show exceptional promise. We cover everything from living expenses to additional training to performance opportunities. I spoke with our director and she wants to meet you next week." "I don't understand," Lisa said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Things like this don't just happen. Not to people like me." "People like you?" David raised an eyebrow. "You mean incredibly talented musicians who deserve a real chance?" Before Lisa could respond, Tom emerged from the back office. He walked over to the piano and Lisa noticed he was carrying something. When he got closer, she saw it was a printout of what looked like social media posts. "Lisa," Tom said, and there was excitement in his voice that she had never heard before. "You need to see this." He handed her the printout. It showed a video posted to social media with the caption, "Hidden Genius Discovered at Rosewood Restaurant." The video was shaky, obviously recorded on someone's phone, but you could clearly hear Lisa's performance of the Rachmaninoff piece. The timestamp showed it had been posted 2 hours ago. "Look at the views," Tom said, pointing. Lisa's eyes widened. The video had been viewed 73,000 times, and it was still climbing. The comments section was flooded with responses. People from all over the city saying they wanted to come hear her play. Music students asking if she gave lessons. A few professional musicians commenting on her technique and emotional expression. "It's been shared over 2,000 times," Tom continued, barely able to contain his excitement. "Local news stations are already reaching out asking if they can do a story." "This is huge, Lisa. This is really huge." Lisa felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Hours ago, she had been worried about making enough in tips to cover her electric bill. Now she was holding a business card from a symphony board member, looking at a viral video, and hearing that news stations wanted to interview her. "I need to offer you something," Tom said, his tone becoming more serious. "And I need you to hear me out before you answer." Lisa looked up at him confused. "Robert has been our pianist for a long time, but he's getting older. His health isn't what it used to be. After tonight, after seeing what you can do and the response you got, I want to offer you a permanent position as our featured pianist. You'd play Thursday through Saturday nights. I can pay you 3 times what you make serving, and you'd still get tips from customers who appreciate the music. You could keep your day shifts during the week if you need extra money, but honestly, between the piano gig and tips, you probably wouldn't need to. 3 times her serving salary, just for doing something she loved, something she had been doing for free in a storage room every night." Lisa's head was spinning, and here's the thing, Tom added. "With this video going viral, people are going to start coming to Rosewood specifically to hear you play. That's good for business, which means I can probably increase your pay even more in a few months." David stood up from the piano bench. "I don't want to pressure you, but I do want to add one more thing. If you take the symphony position, you could do both. Chamber ensemble rehearsals and performances are usually during the day or early evening. You could play here on weekends and maintain a symphony position. A lot of professional musicians have multiple gigs." Lisa looked between the 2 men, both offering her opportunities that seemed impossible just hours ago. Behind them, through the restaurant windows, she could see the city lights glittering in the darkness. Somewhere out there, 73,000 people had watched a video of her playing. Somewhere out there were people who wanted to hear her music. Her phone, which she had left in her apron pocket, suddenly buzzed with a notification. Then another. Then several more in rapid succession. She pulled it out and saw messages from old friends from the conservatory who had seen the video. Her former roommate had sent a string of excited texts with multiple exclamation points. Even Professor Williams, her old piano teacher who she hadn't spoken to in 3 years, had sent a message that simply said, "I knew you still had it in you. Call me." "This is too much," Lisa said, though she was smiling through fresh tears. "This morning I woke up worried about paying rent. Now you're both offering me jobs, there's a viral video, and apparently the news wants to talk to me." "Life changes fast sometimes," David said gently. "The question is, are you ready to let it change?" Lisa thought about her tiny apartment with the leaking faucet. She thought about the storage room piano with its out-of-tune keys. She thought about 3 years of pushing down every dream she had carried, telling herself that survival was enough, that she didn't need anything more than just getting by. But she also thought about how it felt to play that Rachmaninoff piece tonight, to let herself be fully present in the music without holding back. She thought about the tears on the faces of the diners, about the elderly man who said she reminded him of Carnegie Hall, about the young woman who decided not to quit her piano lessons. Her music mattered. It had always mattered. She had just been too afraid and too tired to believe it. "Yes," Lisa said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I'm ready." Tom grinned and extended his hand. "Then you're officially our pianist. Welcome to the team, in a whole new way." Lisa shook his hand, then turned to David. "And the audition, when is it?" "Monday afternoon," David replied. "I'll email you the details. Prepare 2 pieces of your choice. Play what speaks to you, not what you think we want to hear. After tonight, I trust your judgment." As Lisa finally gathered her things to leave, Her phone continuing to buzz with notifications. She felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Real. Tangible hope that maybe the story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. Lisa barely slept that Friday night. She lay in bed scrolling through the comments on the viral video, watching the view count climb higher and higher. By Saturday morning, it had reached over 200,000 views. Local musicians were tagging each other. Music schools were sharing it, and people were asking questions she never thought anyone would ask about her. Where did she train? Does she give concerts? How can I hear her play live? Her phone kept ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. A local television station wanted to interview her for their Sunday morning show. A wedding planner asked if she was available for bookings. Someone from a recording studio left a voicemail asking if she had ever considered making an album. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life while she was sleeping. On Saturday afternoon, Lisa did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She called her mother. "Mom," she said when the familiar voice answered. "Something happened last night. Something big." She told her mother everything, about filling in for Robert, about the decision to play Rachmaninoff, about the standing ovation and David Chen and the job offers. Her mother listened quietly, and when Lisa finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Baby," her mother said, and Lisa could hear tears in her voice. "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." "What is it, Mom?" "I never wanted you to give up music for me, never. I know why you did it, and I love you for it, but it broke my heart watching you set aside your dreams. These last 3 years, every time we talked, I could hear something missing in your voice. And now hearing you like this, hearing that spark back, it's like getting my daughter back fully." Lisa felt tears streaming down her own face. "But you needed help. The bills were impossible. We would have figured it out," her mother said firmly. "Family always figures it out. But you couldn't see any other way, and I was too sick to fight you on it. So I let you sacrifice your dream, and I've regretted it every single day since." "Mom, don't say that. You're here. You're healthy. That's what matters. And now you're getting a second chance," her mother continued. "How many people get that? How many people get to have their moment like you did last night? Don't you dare waste this, Lisa. Don't you dare." They talked for another hour, and by the time Lisa hung up, something had shifted inside her. The guilt she had been carrying, the feeling that pursuing music was somehow selfish or impractical, had loosened its grip. Her mother was right. This was a second chance, and she needed to grab it with both hands. Monday afternoon arrived faster than Lisa expected. She stood outside the concert hall where the symphony rehearsed, her hands clutching sheet music that was slightly crumpled from nervous handling. She had practiced all weekend, barely leaving her apartment except to go to the music store where she usually practiced. The owner, an elderly man who had always been kind to her, had opened the store early on Sunday morning just so she could use their best piano. "Go show them what you've got," he had said, patting her shoulder. "I've been listening to you practice for 3 years. It's about time the rest of the world heard what I've been hearing." Now, standing in front of the imposing concert hall doors, Lisa took a deep breath and walked inside. The audition room was smaller than she expected, but no less intimidating. A grand piano sat in the center, and 5 people sat behind a long table watching her. David Chen was there, giving her an encouraging smile. The others had expressions that were professionally neutral, giving nothing away. "Whenever you're ready," a woman in glasses said, her pen poised above a notepad. Lisa sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. For a moment, the old fear crept in. What if Friday night had been a fluke? What if she couldn't recreate that magic? But then she remembered the faces of the diners at Rosewood. The elderly man with tears in his eyes. The young woman who decided not to quit piano lessons. The businessman who recorded the performance for his daughter. She had played for them. Now she would play for herself. Lisa closed her eyes and began. She had chosen 2 pieces that meant something to her personally. First, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had been working on when her mother was first diagnosed. Then, something more contemporary, a piece by a modern composer that she had discovered during her nights in the storage room, something that spoke to loneliness and hope and the space between dreams and reality. When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked at the panel. The woman in glasses was no longer writing. In fact, all 5 of them were staring at her with expressions that had shifted from professional neutrality to something else entirely. David spoke first. "I told you. he said to his colleagues, a hint of pride in his voice. The woman in glasses set down her pen. "When can you start?" Lisa blinked, not sure she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry?" "The position is yours if you want it," another panel member said, a man with silver hair. "We'll need you for rehearsals starting next week. First performance is in 3 weeks. Does that work for you?" Lisa felt her heart leap into her throat. Yes, absolutely. They spent the next 30 minutes discussing logistics, salary, and schedule. The pay was more than Lisa had made in 6 months of waitressing. They would provide health insurance. She would perform in at least 20 concerts a year, plus various chamber ensemble appearances and educational outreach programs. As she left the concert hall with a contract in her hands and a rehearsal schedule on her phone, Lisa had to sit down on a bench outside just to process what had happened. In 3 days, her entire life had transformed. That weekend, she played at Rosewood for the first time as their official pianist. The restaurant was completely booked with a waiting list of people who wanted to hear the woman from the viral video. Tom had to turn away walk-ins, something that had never happened before in the restaurant's history. Lisa played for 3 hours, mixing classical pieces with jazz standards and even some modern pop songs that she reimagined in her own style. The crowd was different from that first Friday night. These people had come specifically to hear her, had made reservations weeks in advance after seeing the video online. But what made Lisa smile was seeing some familiar faces from that original night. The elderly couple from table 3 came back and sat in the same spot. The businessman from the bar returned with his daughter, a college student who listened with the kind of attention that reminded Lisa of herself at that age. Even the young woman who had wanted to quit piano lessons was there, sitting near the front with her own parents. After her final song, Lisa made an announcement. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. A week ago, I was just trying to get through my shift and make enough tips to pay rent. Then something unexpected happened. I took a chance, and all of you responded in a way that changed my life. Next month, I'll be performing my first concert with the City Symphony at Morrison Hall. I'd love to see some of you there." The applause was warm and genuine, and several people immediately pulled out their phones to look up ticket information. As the evening wound down, Lisa noticed Tom standing near the host stand with someone she didn't recognize. The stranger was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with an expensive camera around her neck. Tom waved Lisa over. "This is Jennifer," Tom said. "She's a journalist with the City magazine. She wants to do a feature story about you. The whole journey, from struggling waitress to symphony musician." Lisa hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her head down, to just focus on the music and not get caught up in the attention. But another part, the part that was learning to embrace this new chapter, recognized an opportunity. "Okay," Lisa said. "Let's do it." The article came out 3 weeks later, just before her symphony debut. It was titled "The Waitress Who Played Her Way to the Symphony," and it told her story with honesty and heart. It talked about her mother's illness, her sacrifice, her years of practicing in a storage room. It included quotes from David Chen, from Tom, from customers who had been at Rosewood that first Friday night. But what Lisa loved most was the final paragraph. The journalist had written, "Lisa's story reminds us that talent doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. It waits, patient and persistent, for the moment when we're brave enough to let it shine again. And when that moment comes, it can transform not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who witnesses it." The night of her symphony debut, Morrison Hall was sold out. Lisa stood backstage in an elegant black dress that her mother had bought for her as a gift. Through the curtain, she could peek at the audience. The elderly couple was there, sitting in the 5th row. Tom had closed Rosewood for the night so all the staff could come. Her mother sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. And scattered throughout the audience were dozens of people she recognized from social media comments, from the viral video shares, from that first magical Friday night. As she walked onto the stage and sat at the grand piano, the applause swelled. Lisa looked out at all those faces, at all those people who had somehow become part of her story, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her hands settled on the keys, steady and sure. And as the first notes filled the concert hall, Lisa smiled. Because sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfection, but from the courage to play your truth, Even when you're scared, even when life has knocked you down, even when you're just a waitress who decided to take a chance on a busy Friday night. The music soared through the hall, and in that moment everything came full circle. The struggle, the sacrifice, the years of quiet practice, the viral video, the second chance. It all led to this, and it was just the beginning.